Hello and welcome to another managerial special from the Honest Football Podcast. We might be a bit rusty because we've had a couple of weeks off from this now. Not had a managerial sacking for a couple of weeks, but this one is a big one because it's one that two of us predicted to go up from the Championship. Now, though we are, of course, talking about Watford and Vladimir Ivic. Craig, your initial reaction before we go into the details of their general culture of sackings at Watford and the way they're going, just your general reaction to Ivic being sacked after 4 months.
When I sent me a message on like Ivic was going to get the boot, I was like, "What?" It literally made no sense because obviously I didn't know the scorelines until I got home from my own football game. Obviously, Watford lost 2-0 to Huddersfield, so I was like, well, "Why did they need second?" Because they were second in the start of the day, and then obviously ended up in fifth. Only a few points behind. It's not the worst thing in the world, but then you got. I was angry to start with because I thought this makes no sense, and then I realised who's in charge and how many sackings have they given to their previous coaches.
Moving over to you, Charlie. Obviously, partly the same question. Obviously, we will get on to Watford's general approach, and it came off the back of a poor result, as Craig mentioned. But early in the season, doing pretty well in the league, albeit we've mentioned a lot in our Championship prediction shows that they're not being spectacular. There's a lot of low-scoring performances. But generally, in the Championship, getting results is what matter, and largely they were.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say, if I'm honest. You don't win the Championship in style. It's not that sort of league. I'm trying to think realistically of the last team who got promoted as champions, or even just got promoted, playing this, I don't know, ticker-tacker, for all a better phrase, style. I thought it's just not that effective way of getting up there. You know, people. I mean, there are managers who get stick for the way they play, and I'm not going to name them, but it is effective. And I think you need to play to the crowd, for want of a better phrase. And what I mean by that is, if you're in the Championship, there is a certain approach you need to take, whether you like it or not. I'm sure, even as fans of clubs, a club in the Championship, the way you play sometimes against some teams is not ideal, but it gets you a result. And one bad result should definitely not mean the sacking of this. They're 4 points off a second, for crying out loud. And what I'm getting at is the games come so thick and fast, particularly around Christmas. 3 games later, you could genuinely be second, 2 points off the top. Do you know what I'm getting at? Like, it's that kind of thing. So for me, if it's a football decision, it makes no sense whatsoever, personally, because unless they're panicking that they're not going to get promoted, and in which case, they're probably not going to get promoted now because of this, because there's going to be a transition. There's going to be the heave-ho that happens. And we talk about a new manager bounce, but then the lull. I just can't see the logic behind it. This can't be a football reason, because if anyone who has any idea about Championship football would know, you shouldn't try and win the league playing stylish football. If you want to do that, you're not going to get promoted, essentially. You have to trade one off for the other.
Well, it's interesting you mention it's not for footballing reasons, because it has come out in the last 24 hours that it seems to not all be entirely footballing based, which we'll get to. I guess one of the other things that come up in our predictions is obviously they've got Norwich up next on Boxing Day, a big game at the top. And as Charlie mentioned, they're only 4 points off second. So it certainly wasn't just based on the pitch. But Craig, we've been here with Watford before, and we have to say, largely it's been a successful approach in the past when they've sacked managers at short notice. It's largely worked for them, up until probably Pearson at the end of last season. So it's something that can work because they've done it a lot of times. But in this instance, do you think it will work?
Well, if you look at previous managers, Watford got to the FA Cup final and Rashi had done brilliantly to get them there. And all right, they got spanked 6-0. But obviously that seemed to be their downfall for them in the Premier League. But they always make the decision when we least expect it. Obviously, we look at Nigel Pearson. Nigel Pearson was probably going to keep Watford up with 2 games to go. And then they got rid of him, and now they're obviously in the Championship again. From a business point of view for that, they've lost so much money. Yeah. You've got to look at Ivic as well. Ivic was manager in a month in November. We're in December. All right, he looked very unhappy during the photo shoot for the Manager of the Month award. But looking at it, you can probably tell that obviously there's something not right there. And obviously, you just said about the statement on the Watford chairman that's obviously come out with Troy Deeney having disciplinary issues. Yeah, there just seems to be a problem with him. And obviously, it looks like they've gone with the player rather than the manager.
Yeah, it's a great point to lead on to, because it's become clear. I know that some of the performances weren't great, and I know the last result is very easy to be judged on. But I think we're all in a general consensus that this is not anywhere near 100% because of footballing reasons. And we have to now get, Charlie, to that statement that Craig mentions, which was just a bit of a bizarre one, because it wasn't really put in context to the sacking the day before. But obviously, a lot of people have put 2 and 2 together. The fact that they've come out and said, Troy Deeney, we don't feel he acted outside the disciplinary code at any time, and we don't feel there's any problems with his commitment to the club, which is fine. Troy Deeney's been a great servant for them. But the timing of it's strange. And after the previous manager or head coach has said they're out for disciplinary reasons, something doesn't quite add up off the pitch. And we talked about this in so many. When there's a problem off the pitch, generally it leads to more on it.
Yeah, and I think on that, like you say, there didn't seem to be the link between the two statements. Nowhere in that statement you read at the beginning did it mention that we have sacked him, virtually because of a relationship breakdown with the players or whatever that, however you want to word that. But then there's just two separate statements, and we, as the fans, need to draw that link. And that, if I'm honest, that sums up Watford's approach to this whole saga with their manager. It feels a bit haphazard. It feels a bit, let's just try and get a few bits out there. And I don't quite understand the logic behind backing a player, whoever it is, great servant or not. The moment you do that, the next manager coming in now has essentially got an untouchable, if we're to believe what's going on, an untouchable striker now. Because if I'm coming in whatever manager I am, it's essentially either I deal with Troy Deeney or I don't manage this club anymore. Well, that's not an environment that's going to thrive. That's not an environment that's going to get you promoted. And more important, and this is the bit that I wanted to lead on to, and I know what you're saying about Watford having a good time with swapping managers and stuff to a degree, but there's no longevity in that club. They're either up or down, up and down. There's no sustainability about it. And that's things we mentioned lower down. We've spoken about other clubs who've changed managers, a sustainable approach. You're not getting that with Watford. So even if they do get this new manager in, it's not going to be a sustainable approach because it only takes Troy Deeney or another player to have a breakdown with him and then they're out. And that shouldn't be that way. It's a cliche. Craig manages a football team now, but you can't have a player bigger than the club. No matter who they are, how good they are, you can't have one bigger than the club. And the minute you do that, you have a breakdown. We'll get on to the question later on. Do I think they'll bounce from this? Personally not. I can't see this now. If you've got that kind of environment, it never recovers quickly and it certainly doesn't happen with the change of one person in the club. So for me, the statement is not worth it, what the paper that it's written on. The fact they back Troy Deeney would worry me as a new manager, but also as a fan now, regardless of what he's done for the club before that.
Forget the result against Huddersfield. Obviously, it happens. Obviously, teams win and lose. You're never going to win every bloody game. Although they just got relegated, they've still got good players in there. All right, there might be some deadwood players, obviously, from the Premier League, but it doesn't make any sense, in my opinion. How can you go on and say, I have full faith in the manager, 3 months later, he's gone. I have full faith in the manager, he's gone. And we're just going to hit to June. It baffles me.
Type of manager you're getting now is someone who is going to try and get a payday. Not trying, what I'm saying is they're not invested in the club. They're not, because they know they're not going to be there long term. If I'm a manager of a team who's maybe not as quite high a profile as Watford, the likelihood is you're going to get a season, 2 seasons tops, and then get a big payout. Sign a 5-year contract or something crazy like that. Get the last 3 years paid off. So you're not getting a manager who's invested in the club. And I'm only using him as an example, but you take like a Nathan Jones at Luton, taking the Stoke bit out, you can see there's a clear love for that club and he has a real care over everything that happens, whether it be from the first team all the way down to probably the under 9s. You just get that impression. I won't ever get that impression of a Watford manager because they're not going to be there long enough to see any fruits of what they've been doing there. So why would you invest in the club properly? The problem is that then translates onto the pitch. And that's where I go back to the sustainability bit. You're just getting a massive turnover of players. There's no investment, not financially, but just as a sustainable club that will do well and be successful all of the time. So the point I'm getting at is if you can't have a manager who wants to take the club forward over the next 5 years, what's the point? If I was a manager and I think, right, between jobs, need a bit of a payday, I'll go to Watford, but I'm not going to be there for more than 2 years tops.
It's not like they're going to financially invest in new players because they're financially investing in managers' sackings. It doesn't make any sense.
One of the things we've got to come back to, lads, is the point that you've both made, is they still have good players, they still have a good squad, and at their best, they are a team that probably all three of us on paper would predict to go up because at their best, they're a very good side and one of the best in the Championship. So we've got to look at that. Is there a bit of hope? If they do get the managerial appointment, right, or the head coach appointment, we should say now, then we'll talk about the contenders and the likely appointment in a minute. But looking at them moving forward this season, if they get the right person and they can sweep all of this stuff away off the pitch, surely there's still a contention for promotion, isn't there, lads?
I think they've got enough quality in terms of players, but what would worry me is, they've been grinding out wins. They haven't been playing well. I mean, that's probably fairly obvious to anyone who's watched them, but they have been getting points, whether it be a draw against Brentford, They have been picking up points, against teams who are in form when they're not in the best form. What worries me, though, is you have a new manager coming in, is clearly that will have an impact. What happens in that dressing room, whether they like it or not, whether all of the players back the gaffer or all of the players back Troy Deeney, that's going to have an impact. And it's not going to be the same set of players with the same mentality that played against Brentford or, 2 weeks before that or whatever. Yes, their current position is great. I think this is possibly the watershed moment and the sliding doors moment. And the fact is, I think they've backed the player. And I don't think we'll go on to that in a bit, I think they'll slowly drop quite a lot of points over Christmas. Because I just can't see a harmonious dressing room when the games come thick and fast. You need everyone to muck in, you need everyone to dig in and be singing off the same hymn sheet, pulling in the same direction. That can't be the case. If you've got a squad of 30 players, not everyone's going to have backed Troy Deeney. We've all played football, we've all been in dressing rooms, whether it's grassroots, the elite level of the game. Not everyone always sides with the one person, whether it's the player or the manager. So for me, there's going to be a fractious dressing room. Games are thick and fast over Christmas. I could see them nosediving a bit now, personally.
But Craig, over to you on the same thing. I mean, it's important to remember on the pitch, we talk about the divides and things that perhaps may be there based on the recent statements. They've only lost 2 of their last 11 games. They might not be playing perfectly fluent football. I mean, if we look at the derby earlier in the season against Luton, it was a ground out 1-0 win, but they looked comfortable doing it, albeit it wasn't particularly exciting to watch. Surely they're a side that can contend, even if there are fractures behind the scene, because they've been doing that most of the season.
Well, yeah, if you look at the start of the season, early results, they were winning 1-0. Maybe because they just got relegated from the Premier League, and you look at Norwich and Bournemouth, think, oh, well, they're in the top 2 there. But Bournemouth, to be fair, they're only 1 or 2 points behind 3, 4 and 5. So, but that's the Championship for you. We do predictions every week, and most of the time we get it wrong. But that's what happens. Results it throws a form book out the window when it comes to Championship. So, results-wise, I think they were fine. Obviously, they lost 2-0 to Huddersfield, but the only reason why they probably lost to Huddersfield, actually, there's 2 reasons. 1, Huddersfield played well, and 2, obviously, what happened in the background. It's not got nothing to do with on the field. It's literally to do with
no.
the field.
Because if you're a chairman of a club in the Championship, you can't be a chairman of a club in the most unpredictable league in the world and then expect predictable, consistent results. It's just not like that. So to expect them to to go the whole season unbeaten or something like that is crazy. But yeah, they're in a good position. I just think the expectation on them is massively, massively ridiculous at times. But,
no team runs away in the Championship.
Exactly.
It's always tight. When it gets to December, especially in the Championship, it's always tight. And then when you get to like March, April, that's when teams start to run away. But you look at Leeds, for example, they started to run away with it. Post-lockdown, yeah, they ran away with it. But yeah, no team runs away with it this time of the year. And I think what they've got in their heads, the owners have got in their heads, we should be top of the table, smashing this league.
Let's move on to successors. Now, at the time we're recording this, there is an almost certain successor who is a surprise name, I think it would be fair to say. And by the time this episode comes out, after a little bit of editing, he might well have been appointed for all we know. But what I don't want to ask you is your thoughts on him yet. We'll come to that in a minute. What I want to ask you, if you hadn't heard that news, if you're going from a clean slate, who's the man you would choose now? I'll start with Charlie.
Well, I think we've gone for the same sort of person. And, the man who's available is probably Slaven Bilic. But again, he's a strong character. And Nigel Pearson, he obviously said, in a similar situation, right, you either back me or whatever. And I just think that Bilic would be too strong for him. I think as a chairman, they're not going to choose him. But honestly, I know you could have a list as long as you want. I genuinely now, they've unfortunately created a place and a space and a culture. As a manager, I don't know who would actually want to take that job other than for financial gain. There's not anything attractive about having your head on the chopping block every week from week 1 up until what are we on week 21 of the Championship? In terms of who I think it should be, probably Bilic, but to be honest, it could be anyone. Troy Deeney, the way it's going, he might as well manage the club. Do you know what I mean? So
it had been suggested by a few, but I'll ask you the same, Craig, because I think you were the first in the WhatsApp group to suggest Bilic. So I presume you were in agreement with that. Yeah,
no, I totally agree on Sam Bilic. I was going to say you need a strong character to manage Watford with the owners that you've got in there, but the owners don't seem to give time to any manager. Ivic looks like a strong manager. He wants to determine everything set out properly, and they didn't give him time at all. But I think another one we could probably point out is probably Eddie Howe. I'd rather go for Slaven, but Eddie Howe needs longevity in the club.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's why I don't think he will last long in Watford. And that's not a disrespect to Eddie Howe. It's more of the owners.
Yeah, I agree in the sense. I don't think either of those two, most importantly, would probably accept the job, other than financially, possibly. But let's move on to the man who it looks like it's going to be. Because as it standard, it's projected across most of the media that Xisco Munoz is going to be appointed manager within the next 48 hours. He is currently in charge of Dinamo Tbilisi. This year, 2020, which was his first year in management, he'd been an assistant before. He'd worked at a couple of other clubs in Spain and across the board. However, as much as experience he has as a player, he's not got a huge amount as a manager. And I guess for you two guys, that sort of links to what you were saying about having a strong, experienced character. The board are probably looking for something a bit different.
They've gone from someone experienced to pretty much someone who's only had one managerial job or coaching role, shall I say, which to go to the Championship like that from just one managerial experience is bloody hard. If he is in charge, I can see him gone by March.
That's a very bold statement. Charlie, I'll come to you for the same thing.
I don't think it's the wisest move. When you're talking about a situation that made the old manager leave was a breakdown with relationships with a very strong character or characters in the dressing room. Do you want someone whose only job is managing very limited experience I don't know. I mean, it's a gamble. He might end up being, the best thing that Watford have ever had and getting promoted, and they won't lose a game for the rest of the season. However, we all know it's like whether you go into a new job in a new environment, particularly if it's a bigger, and it's taken out of a football context, a bigger company, for the want of a better phrase, there is an element of feeling overwhelmed quite quickly, and particularly if you've got really strong older heads in that dressing room who will like things a certain way or want certain things to happen, and you're trying to push against that. And again, as I alluded to earlier, going in without necessarily having the confidence of the board that if the push comes to shove, who's going to win out of the two of you? I personally think it's a crazy, crazy decision to get a manager of this little experience in this situation, given why they got rid of the last one.
So based on the assumption then that Xisco looks like almost certainly being the man, the 5th head coach in 15 months at Watford, we'll obviously find out a bit later in the week what you expect to happen against Norwich when the Championship Predictions show comes out. But looking forward to the season. We all had Watford to finish in the top 6. I had them to win the league. Craig, you had them in the playoffs. Charlie, you too, but also getting promoted. Where do you see Watford going this season? I guess you've hinted at it already, but I'll start with you, Charlie. What do you expect to happen? Will they still be in the playoffs and will they still go up?
Long and short answer, no. No, I genuinely think this is, as I said, sliding doors, man. And they've got out of jail with previous managers. They've got out of jail with previous times that they've chopped and changed, and they've had a good younger squad. It's an aging squad. It's getting, a lot of those lads are starting to get the wrong side of 30. I know there's a bit of a youth in there, but there is still lads there who I think are not going to be getting any younger, to put it politely. I think with an inexperienced manager with a very dominant dressing room that possibly is fractious, as we spoke about earlier. They've got some tough games coming up. I think the game's coming thick and fast over for Christmas. I think Christmas will be the turning point for them. I think they'll start to nosedive. Personally, at best, maybe they'll sneak into the bottom of the playoffs, but I can't see it. I think 7th, 8th, something like that. Personally, I don't think they'll make the playoffs.
That's fair enough and very bold. Craig, what about yourself? You had them in the playoffs too, but not to go up. So what are your predictions for the rest of the season?
Do I think they'll go up? No. I think they've not helped themselves. As Charlie said earlier, we're in the Christmas period, like 4 or 5 games in this run. As you said, you could be in the top 2 for all we know. Just because they've done that, and I really said that he'd probably gone by March, I don't see him going up at all.
And I presume with that, you don't see them in the top 6 either?
No, 7th.
Fair enough. Well, I'm actually going to be the odd one out here, I think. And I don't often do this, but I still think they're not going to win the league, which I predicted. It looks like Norwich are just starting to drift away with it, although Christmas could change that. But there's 4, 5, 6 other teams that are so close together. I could see Watford still getting in the top 6. And I still think 2nd is there to play for, but I'm not sure they'll get that. I think Watford will be in the playoffs. I'm not quite sure they'll be able to go up, but it will depend on the long run to the end of the season. But I don't think this is going to be a disaster. We've seen it so many times before, and it's generally been right for Watford. This one's very strange off the pitch. I think there will be a few more player ins and outs in January than we might have expected. But I am still going to go for Watford to finish in the top 6 and take part in the playoffs at the end of the season. But that will be all for this episode. Thank you to Craig and Charlie for joining me. If you did enjoy the episode, please do put a thumbs up on the video. Subscribe down below for regular content, including Championship predictions every match day. And of course, if you're a Watford fan, let us know what you think, because obviously we always talk about in these episodes, which we haven't today, the loud minority on Twitter. So I'd be interested to know what some of the fans actually think of this decision and what they think of the direction the club's going in. You can follow us on Twitter at HonestFootball3. Of course, we all wish you a Merry Christmas, and we wish the best of luck to Xisco if he does get appointed as the Watford head coach. And we'll see you next time for Championship predictions.